most folks in practice today, especially folks who manage bills and relationships and have to get paid, know that they're not making 100 cents on the dollar of, whatever it is that they're billing. And so to the extent that they can do things more efficiently, most practice areas are feeling some pricing pressure. And so, I think the ability to be more effective, to show your clients that you're being more effective, to create a more compelling case for why you should be paid for the hours that you spend, I think it's not as in as much tension as maybe it was in the past.
How is AI going to change the practice of law? How is one of the most forward-looking law firms adapting? And will the billable hour go away? Today, we are joined on the abstract by Joe Green, the Chief Innovation Officer at Gunderson Dettmer. Joe has had a super interesting career at the intersection of law and technology. He's also a co-founder and director of the Open Cap Table Coalition, which I'm going to ask him about today. He's a fund advisor to the Legal Tech Fund and a board advisor to Vic AI. He was also a board advisor to Omni, which was sold to JP Morgan. That's a pretty cool company if you haven't heard of it before. And he's mentored and taught at both Central Michigan University and Columbia. He spent 4 years working at Thomson Reuters, working on practical law, and this is his second tour at Gunderson. He started his career doing something different at Simson Thacher, which we'll also talk about. Joe, thanks so much for joining me today for this episode of The Abstract.
Awesome to be here, Tyler. Thanks for having me.
All right, let's start somewhere fun before we get serious. Is the billable hour going away, Joe?
Just throw out those softballs to start, huh? I think the answer is the same as it has been probably for the last 2 decades, which is any day now. Any day now.
We'll come back to this. Like, how is the legal profession evolving? But I want to go back in time just a little bit. You started your career at Simson Thacher, tracking your time in 6-minute increments, not working for tech clients. When did you realize you wanted to move into tech? Was that a conscious decision, or was that just something that sort of came about by happenstance?
Well, I had always been interested in technology, kind of in my personal life. I like gadgets, consumer tech, like many people. I hadn't really considered professionally focusing on the technology industry. And when I went to Simson, I had a very broad practice across a whole bunch of different industries. And it was actually through pro bono work that I kind of explored this interest, and it really happened pretty organically. Simson had weekly sessions, like clinics, where even before I was admitted to the bar, I was able to go and talk to kind of, micro entrepreneurs opening up a cafe somewhere in New York City, or, basically just kind of free services. And so I kind of spent this time talking to very, very early stage, entrepreneurs, and kind of helping them, guide them through bureaucracy and, kind of thinking about legal requirements. And, frankly, anybody with Google could have done the same thing. But I enjoyed those conversations. And then I kind of happened to get on, a couple of other projects. One was about, kind of microfinance, a big microfinance organization. Another was kind of a clean tech sustainability incubator that was being run out of CUNY, City University of New York. And when I got a recruiter call, mentioning Gunderson, I was not thinking about going to another law firm at all. I was thinking, maybe I'd go in-house, or, I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do at that point. And I frankly didn't know that there was much of a New York tech scene at the time, because it was still quite fledgling. When I got that call, I thought if I wanted to do tech, I'd have to move out to California. So it was sort of the confluence of those things, right? It was, even though it was mostly, my day job was working on kind of big Wall Street, deals for big established companies, I had self-selected into these volunteer projects that all sort of had this kind of startup tech flavor to them, and just seemed like the right move.
Was it a difficult transition to make in terms of servicing or dealing with Gunderson's clients, which I'd imagine are approaching the way that they leverage outside counsel in a very different way, maybe than some of Simson Thacher's clients were, or at least the clients who you were working with?
Yeah. I mean, as a junior associate, the folks at Blackstone and KKR were not super interested in my business advice. Whereas when I moved to Gunderson and working with, kind of first-time entrepreneurs who, have engineering backgrounds or, other backgrounds in other industries, but have never started a business before, pretty quickly I knew more than they did about the things that they were going to encounter. And being able to give, kind of equal parts business and legal advice was something that I was really attracted to. Is one of the things that I really liked about working with, folks who have, less sophistication isn't the right word, just less experience in, having kind of been through this rodeo before.
Right. They're founders, they're entrepreneurs, they're good at taking something from 0 to 1.
Yeah.
They're good at hiring a team of engineers probably, or product visionary folks, or not so much necessarily at like all of the operational stuff that's happening to make that go. When you decided to join Thomson Reuters, I mean, that's a really interesting move. It's not like I'm going in-house to be an AGC somewhere or work for some, awesome GC who's going to mentor me because someday I'm going to be a GC. Was it like scary to take this sort of non-linear move and get off that lawyer career path? Tell us how that came about.
Yeah, from the time that I was at Simpson, where, Simpson's such a phenomenal firm, such an amazing reputation. And the idea of like, what are you going to do from there? And are you kind of foreclosing opportunities and kind of narrowing what your possibilities are coming from this place where people go on to do just, whether they stay there and become, leading partners or move, into all kinds of, kind of amazing positions. So that's sort of been a question at every, kind of step of my career. The move to Thomson Reuters was, if you didn't kind of know where I'd come from, it seems a little bit out of left field. The head of the New York office at Gunderson, when I went in to give my notice, I think was ready to try to pitch me on why I should stay and kind of, talk about it. And he sort of had to pause, and he was like, I don't think I've had anyone leave to go to legal publishing before. It's not a common path. That said, Practical Law has, a large law firm's worth of attorney editors who have, decades and decades of experience. It's actually kind of an amazing place. For me, the journey to getting there was, I had decided, despite having practiced for 7 or 8 years, I had decided pretty early on that being a practicing law firm partner was not kind of my end goal.
Yeah.
And it took a lot of thinking and experimentation to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. I thought about academia. I wrote a law review article while I was a practicing lawyer, co-authored a law review article with a professor at UNC Chapel Hill. I had a stealth legal tech startup that didn't make it out of stealth. We couldn't find a technical co-founder. I was even applying to like PhD programs in neuroscience because I thought I wanted to study the intersection between neuroscience and decision-making and law.
Wow.
I was all over the place.
Yeah.
And then another recruiter happened to call with a thing that I wasn't expecting. And Practical Law and Thomson Reuters struck me as this interesting combination of writing, but writing about practical things, not kind of esoteric academic things, but things that would actually impact the way lawyers are practicing, using the knowledge that I had gained through all of those years of practicing. Getting to work in one of the biggest legal tech companies in the world and, getting to see whether I could build interesting things that would help lawyers, which I ended up doing at Thomson Reuters. Frankly, just having more time to be able to kind of figure out what it is that I wanted to do when I grow up.
Yeah.
TR really did deliver on all of those things, for me personally.
It's around that time, you're at Thomson Reuters, you start to have like some really interesting, what I'd say, like our side hustles, right? Or like, you're advising this, advising that. I guess my first question before we talk about any of them specifically is, is your mindset changing now, being a little bit on the tech side about what's possible for you or what's out there, or the New York startup scene is growing up, right? Tell us about how you're thinking maybe differently now about what's possible in the intersection of tech and law.
When I was at Thomson Reuters, that's really when I, fell into the world of legal tech and really kind of, I felt like, kind of to the center of it in a lot of the things that I was doing. My job at Practical Law was to sit at my desk and write resources for the Practical Law website. I mean, that's what my job description was, and that's what most practical law editors do, and they do a fabulous job of it. And they do a bunch of other things too. I mean, they do podcasts, they do all kinds of other things. From pretty soon after I got there, I had a whole bunch of ideas, and I had a very supportive boss. The leadership at Practical Law was supportive of this too. Because of my startup background, pursuing product ideas, frankly. Like I had an idea for a whole kind of startup and small business focused suite of resources and tools that got funding and that we built out. I was, because I had been advising startups for years and doing their beta tests and, been in that world. I got involved with, a little bit with TR Ventures, a little bit with the labs, doing various POC projects. I was writing for kind of the Thomson Reuters Institute about the legal industry and going to conferences and writing things. I still had this academic, kind of notion that, maybe that was the direction I was headed. So I published another 4 law review articles, I think, in the time that I was at Practical Law.
Oh, wow.
Chapter about legal tech and startup lawyering, all kind of focused on technology, the intersection of technology, law as a business, where the legal industry was headed. And yeah, I mean, that was in addition to taking on some board advisor, type of roles. Yeah, I was a little bit all over the place. PR, they were very kind to indulge me in my varied interests.
That's a good thing. I mean, that's how you start to figure out, what you're passionate about. But I think also, at least this has been, a little bit of my experience too, is when you're working on 2 or 3 or 4 things at once, and maybe you have your hands in things that are adjacent and related but slightly different, you end up being better at all of them because you feel more creative. At least that's my experience. I don't know if you're the same way.
Yeah, I have found that I have a lot of really varied interests that end up, funny enough, kind of benefiting from one another, kind of pulling these different kind of threads together in interesting ways, has led to some very interesting opportunities. And I think that having the flexibility to do that, having the time to do that, I mean, it was one of the things that I struggled with as a practicing lawyer, was just that, it doesn't leave a whole lot of time for anything else. Unless you're very, very intentional about it.
I am really curious about one of these, and it's not something that I've researched deeply and know a lot about, which is the Open Cap Table Coalition, which you helped start. Can you tell us about that? Tell us about the mission.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess for listeners who may not be, as familiar with kind of the startup law space, every startup company out there has to keep track of who owns the startup. If you've ever worked at a startup and you've gotten stock options, that we need to keep track of that. And historically, it was law firms that did that. We used to just do it in Excel. And we had, complicated Excel models to keep track of this stuff. And then, a decade plus ago, Carta came onto the scene and more and more startups and their law firms started managing cap tables on a software platform. And that has expanded. There are other players in the market. There have been, even, predating Carta. But that's become the norm now. And one of the challenges, in the market is that different law firms have different ways of doing things. Different platforms have different ways of doing things. Everybody wants this stuff to work better and be more seamless, so that, the technology can be more enabling of, handling this kind of administrative work, more easily, more cost effectively. And one of the biggest challenges with it is that there's no standard for what a cap table is. And so a very small group, as it started out, me and 2 other folks, a colleague of mine who was former colleague of mine who was at Latham at the time and has since returned to Latham, and one of the co-founders and CEOs of one of the cap table platforms, got together and just started thinking about, well, what would benefit this industry is having some kind of standard that allows everyone to, be speaking the same language, move data from one system to another, and especially for different, reasons. You may have your cap table on one platform, but you may want to conduct a tender offer using a separate software provider.
Sure.
And so being able to, kind of have that flow of data, more easily, was something that was an obvious pain point for everyone kind of involved in the industry. And so from there, we kind of, started reaching out to people that we knew, engaging their interest, and, ended up getting a kind of initial founding group of 10 of the top law firms, kind of who have most of the market share in the venture capital space, and the biggest platforms, Carta, LTSE Equity, and Morgan Stanley ShareWorks at the time, to be part of this founding group, which then grew to, about over 50 members. We recently just became a trade organization, a 501c6 trade organization. So now it's an official organization with dues paying members. It includes the vast majority of the stakeholders, kind of in the space. And there's been real outputs. We created a JSON data standard, open source data standard that you can find on GitHub. You can get there from opencaptablecoalition.com. People are contributing to it outside of the dues paying members. People are building whole cap table platforms on the standard. We've also built an Excel based standard that we call OCX. The JSON standard is called OCF, Open Cap Format. So a lot of work has been done, a lot of engineering hours from all of these different organizations, lots of hours of lawyers and subject matter experts from these firms. It's really been kind of an incredible thing. I sort of have to pinch myself. This started with just a few people just kind of having a conversation, saying, hey, there's got to be a better way to do this.
Was aligning all of those stakeholders challenging? I mean, law firms are not necessarily known for wanting to work with each other super well, and I guess it's a little bit different, but you see folks trying to do this around, say, like standard contracts between, like, let's have a standard template for an NDA that all businesses use, and then we don't have to negotiate, or data protection addendum, I think that those efforts are great, but like those haven't really taken off maybe in the same way that this have. Slightly different scenario, but like was actually bringing those people together easy, or was it pretty challenging?
Yeah, surprisingly easy. But I think that's not necessarily transferable to some of these other initiatives that you've spoken of, which I'm familiar with too, and think are great. The coordination challenges of doing something like, trying to get every business or every big business to agree on kind of like a standard form of NDA is massive, right? I mean, there's just you have to kind of like pick an area, right? The places where this sort of stuff has been successful, at least in the legal context, I think of the NVCA venture financing agreements as being an example of kind of a standardization, initiative. ISDA in the derivatives marketplace. And again, I think it's when you have a somewhat smaller group of core stakeholders, and there's really sufficient alignment that everybody kind of feels the pain and sees what the value proposition is. I think that's kind of what we experience, is that in having these conversations with the law firms that were initially part of the coalition and the platforms, like nobody needed to be sold on why this is a thing that was a problem that needed to be solved. And then the actual solving of it, you would think, like, for a bunch of lawyers, I mean, we were meeting, every other Friday for, 2 years, debating, what should be included in a cap table, and, just like the dorkiest things imaginable. We all had a really good time doing it. And it actually turns out, like, because we all have kind of felt the pain of doing this the way that we've been doing it. And there were just way more similarities than differences. And so it's actually been kind of like an amazingly harmonious experience so far. But yeah, I think that some of those bigger, kind of broader initiatives to standardize, kind of contracting across the board or writ large, it's a much bigger endeavor.
Tell me a little bit about the decision to rejoin Gunderson and what brought you back to the firm. And then also, when you were hired, it wasn't for this CIO role. So how that sort of came about and evolved to get you to the seat that you're sitting in now.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was at Thomson Reuters, I mentioned I was writing a bunch of things about the legal industry, and really just kind of like a sponge, just soaking up everything that I was learning about kind of trends in the industry, where things were going. And from that perch, from that view, it was really a 30,000 foot view. I was looking at from solo practitioners and the products that they were buying, and the kind of issues that they were facing, all the way up to the largest global law firms. And kind of what the trends were, kind of in that, throughout the industry. Because I had been writing a variety of different, articles, I got a call for a book chapter, just a cold email ask if I wanted to contribute to a book on legal innovation. And I had this idea, this thesis that the firms like Gunderson, the firms that are, kind of focusing on and have large presences in the, emerging companies, venture capital space, we're going to be at the vanguard of change in the industry for a variety of reasons. The nature of their clients being very tech savvy and wanting there to be technology solutions for everything, as well as cost sensitivity. I mean, there was just like kind of a whole slew of reasons that I kind of had this idea, and so I went around and I talked to a whole bunch of the firms in the space. to kind of see what they were doing, how they were thinking about things. And, I wrote this book chapter. And at the time, Gunderson was having a lot of those thoughts internally. And I was still friends with a lot of the people who I kind of grew up with there. We would still have lunch, for the 4.5 years that I was at Thomson Reuters, I have lunch with people from Gunderson at least once a week, if not twice a week. And so just through those kind of very organic conversations about all the things that I was learning and thinking about, we sort of realized that maybe there was, alignment for me to come back and try to actually put some of those things into action, which was very attractive. It was a place that I knew, people that I knew and liked very much. In an industry that I thought was really, or a part of the industry that I thought was really ripe for real change. And so, I came back. My title was Director of Client Experience. Gunderson, was just kind of starting to dip its toes into having people who had been full-time practicing lawyers in these kinds of, more kind of business and technology roles. And, in reality, my title changed a few years into the job, but the job itself, hasn't really changed at all. I've, from the time that I've been back at the firm, this is basically what I've been doing.
We're going to talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that you have underway and the resources that you've got. But I've got to ask the sort of question, which is, there is a tension between, and we can talk about this too, maybe like the traditional billable hour business model and doing things in a faster, more efficient, innovative way. At least in theory, there's a little bit of a tension there. And you see,
I'm assuming you have 100% realization, but yes.
and you see a bunch of law firms hiring CIOs, and I think that the sort of leash that they're given to innovate probably varies considerably. What's the sort of push and pull like between you and the partnership? And also maybe when you were stepping into this role, how did you know that like it was going to be for real and you were going to get the resources that you needed to actually sort of help the firm innovate?
It was a large part of my conversations and coming into the role was, kind of how committed and how serious was the partnership around, doing this stuff. And I satisfied myself that they were serious about, kind of making a go of it. That said, in coming into the role, there was a lot of, kind of meeting people, talking to people, and kind of, bit by bit, incrementally building up consensus for the types of things, the types of bigger changes, that we've been pursuing. And I think, that varies tremendously by firm. I mean, firms also vary tremendously in terms of their, geographic complexity, their size, and the nature of their clientele. And that's one area where we're extremely fortunate in that our clientele are tech entrepreneurs, life sciences entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. And, these are folks who understand technology, want technology. Whereas in many other firms, when their, kind of key clients are very large, highly regulated banks, insurance companies, those just tend to be much more conservative institutions, particularly in the way that they deal with their outside counsel. The banks are a very interesting story in that, they themselves have tons of, invest tremendously in technology, but don't appear to trust their law firms to do that because they put a lot of restrictions on what their law firms can do. And I think in many firms, that's more where the tension seems to be these days, is in, kind of coming from clients, putting shackles on what law firms can or can't do in ways that make it very hard, to innovate. To your point about the tension with the billable hour. I think that most folks in practice today, especially folks who manage bills and relationships and have to get paid, know that they're not, making 100 cents on the dollar of, whatever it is that they're billing. And so to the extent that they can do things more efficiently, actually realize that, the time that's spent on, on those matters and then deploy those hours elsewhere, even if you stay under a billable hour model, in most practice areas are feeling some pricing pressure. And so, I think the ability to be more effective, to show your clients that you're being more effective, to create a more compelling case for why you should be paid for the hours that you spend, those are all, I think it's not as, in as much tension as maybe it was in the past.
The abstract is brought to you by SpotDraft, an end-to-end contract lifecycle management system that helps high-performing legal teams become 10 times more efficient. If you spend hours every week drafting and reviewing contracts, worrying about being blindsided by renewals, or if you just want to streamline your contracting processes, SpotDraft is the right solution for you. From creating and managing templates and workflows, to tracking approvals, e-signing, and reporting via an AI-powered repository, SpotDraft helps you in every stage of your contracting. And because it should work where you work, it integrates with all the tools your business already uses. SpotDraft is the key that unlocks the potential of your legal team. Make your contracting easier today at spotdraft.com. Maybe two observations, as we're talking about this. The first, which I think is really interesting, is, your clients pushing for this sort of change, potentially because of the clients that Gunderson serves. And I'm building on an idea that like our COO, Akshay Verma, has, which is that AI has a lot of potential, but it may not radically change the efficiency of the work that law firms or folks in-house or do immediately today. Yeah. But it is going to spark a behavioral change and an expectation change. And that is going to precede, say, like the efficiency gains that will come from the technology. So, one sort of observation that I'm curious for your thought on is like, do you see that? Do you think that's right? A second would be, around the idea of lawyers wanting to work more efficiently and dedicating their time to other tasks or other client matters, or that are more interesting or like actually more interesting, right, to them, or a more productive use of their time. I think that's right. I think that happens at the top end of the market, though, because it assumes that demand is like pretty inelastic for legal services, right? Like and so Gunderson is going to thrive in that world, whereas maybe, actually, you can debate this too, right? Like maybe second tier law firms won't, and third tier law firms actually will, because like they're cheap and super efficient, right? I don't know. I'm curious for your thoughts on both of those hypotheses.
Yeah, to take the latter, I think differentiation and being able to really kind of deliver services effectively and efficiently, I think are going to be pretty key in the world that we're moving into, and it'll be interesting to see how firms kind of in that mushy middle navigate that. As for the demand piece of it, obviously there's a point at which maybe this breaks down, and certainly I think there are major business model ramifications, but I do think there's a tremendous amount of latent demand in the market. I think that in-house legal departments have grown so big in part because outside counsel has gotten so expensive. Yeah. And if the cost of delivering outside counsel services decreases, and the work that's actually being done by the outside counsel is increasingly higher value, real value add work.
Yes.
I think that could work out very nicely for everybody, the clients as well as the firms. But I think it's a tricky thing to navigate. And I think, certainly the pricing model, the billable hour, and kind of the leverage model of most major law firms, strikes me as, potentially being quite wobbly. Not necessarily today. I think Akshay, your COO is right that, where the technology is at today, you can see the potential. You can see how this is now coming for things that we would have thought would have been kind of, purely the province of human beings for a long time. And that does have everybody thinking. And I think it does have, there will be kind of behavioral change. You can already see it kind of in the conversations, around this between buy side and sell side, in the industry. But for the technology to really kind of, fulfill on the promise, it's still got a little ways to go. The pace of change has been incredible. I wouldn't be betting against this happening much sooner than people expect. And anybody who's not kind of thinking about it and planning for it, I think will be sorry. Yeah. But it is my hope, and this is what I tell folks all the time, is having done this, having practiced for as long as I did, I feel in my bones all of the places that there is pain in being a lawyer, and so much of it is unnecessary. So so much of it is things that none of us went to law school to do. Nobody gets out of bed in the morning excited to go do a lot of, when I started practicing, I was printing out pages that had people's signature lines on it and PDFing them and, faxing them places. I mean, this is certainly not why I thought I went to law school. And so, I do think that there's, a potentially very positive future in terms of, giving lawyers the time to actually focus on the things where we actually do provide a lot of value, and then reframing in clients' minds that that's the thing that you're actually paying us for. It's not the pushing of the paper and listen, those are necessary evils to getting work done, which is why, and most people don't want to do it or can't do it very efficiently. And so, that's why we do it. There's a reason we do it. It's not because we love it. Those pieces of the job. But I think there's a lot of potential for everyone to be kind of focusing on higher and better things. There's not enough hours in the day for anyone.
Yeah.
To do the things that we're trying to do. Right. I think of all we could do if we could free up some of that time.
Tell us about some of the things that you're building. I mean, ChatGD, good name, is maybe the biggest launch that you've had. But tell us about what you're working on from a product and technical perspective, because being chief innovation officer is not just about talking about innovation at Gunderson. I know, and it's not just about I'm going to go out and buy a license to ChatGPT for our attorneys.
Yeah. And listen, I mean, philosophically, anytime we can go out and buy a license to well-supported third-party software where there's a market incentive for them to make it better, great. Law firms should not be in the business of building everything they need to run their business in-house. We're not going to build Workday, and we're not going to build our financial management system necessarily, right?
Yep.
So, it's where do you draw that line, and what's the most effective way to build the thing you need to build to solve the problem? For so much of this, it doesn't need to be kind of a very bespoke solution. For some of it, it does. And for us, ChatGPT, I think, is an interesting kind of, example of that kind of buy versus build decision making in practice. We did not set out, when ChatGPT came out, we did not say, oh, we should build that for our internal use. That was not a thought that occurred to me in the least. But when GPT-4 came out and Casetext and Harvey had kind of early access to it, and there was kind of a feeding frenzy around, firms, kind of working with those companies, we had some conversations there, looked at the price tag, and for us anyway, we kind of looked at that and said, I mean, that is a lot of money for a product category that, doesn't exactly exist right now. And we're not sure whether people are going to use it, what kind of value they're going to find out of it. And I had a colleague with a technical background who said, hey, there's most of this stuff is open source and it's sort of out there. I think maybe we could build something that would do something like this. And when I say like this, we weren't looking to build a solution that was going to say, hey, now lawyers, this is how you do X, Y, and Z. You don't do it the way you used to do it. Now you use this tool. Really what we wanted to build was all we really wanted to do. The problem we were trying to solve is this isn't going to be a foundational technology. We are in the technology business. Our lawyers should be getting exposure to this, get their hands on it, be able to understand what it is, what it can do today, what it can't do today. And figure out how they might be able to make it useful for themselves. And we wanted them to be able to do that in a secure way where we could also learn from the way that they were using it. So that's why we built what we built. And, what we built was an application that allows you to chat directly with, one of the Azure OpenAI LLMs, or do retrieval augmented generation where, end user can upload some documents and then effectively chat with the documents. And it was a huge success for the goals that we set out, which was getting our people some hands-on experience. We did it in an incredibly cost-effective way while the market continues to mature and develop and figure it out. And frankly, still in many cases struggle to get that last mile to a full kind of production, consistent, repeatable solution. Certainly, struggles terribly to get to any kind of headless solution that doesn't require a human in the loop. And so, we feel really happy with what we did there. It was a great example of, why taking a swing at something that wasn't on our roadmap, wasn't something we were planning to do, seemed, like it was a good time to be nimble and explore it.
Do you feel like you're working with product managers, you're working with engineers, you're probably working on product requirement documents and pushing this forward. And do you feel like your mindset has changed? Like, do you think of yourself as a lawyer anymore? I mean, I'm almost asking specifically, like, are you going to partners in the firms and saying, like, hey, help me identify the risks here? Like, to what extent are you thinking about all of this? I'm not saying people can't, wear two hats at once, obviously, but it's a little tough to be the one who's like, we're going to push this whole initiative forward and try to drive adoption and meet these deadlines, and also be the one who feels like, okay, I'm responsible for identifying all the things that could go wrong with this or all the risks to the business. Like, how do you handle that?
Yeah, so my partner in crime in all of this, Naveen Pai, is our chief knowledge officer. We sort of came up together as the first lawyers who kind of moved into these roles, and I think we sort of view ourselves as the product managers, but the product isn't the tech solution that we're building, right? That's a tool. The product is delivering modern legal services, modern seeming legal services to our clients. And the inputs that go into that, I mean, the technology is just one kind of small component to that. We deal with kind of process management and process improvement kind of across the board, with our end attorneys, knowledge management, and, how we have the right raw materials that lawyers need to actually do their jobs, and the third party technology tools that we integrate into that. How do we bring all of that together to deliver the services? That's the product that we're managing.
Interesting.
Everything else is sort of, it's a piece of the puzzle. But in terms of, and I think the benefit of that is that because both of us spent significant years in practicing here, we don't have to go out and do a focus group or go find out where is this process broken. Like, we know, we know where the issues are. We still talk to people, right? I mean, without question. We also still do a fair bit of lawyering. People come to us because we're the ones who are the repositories for all the difficult problems that, like, people are wondering, do we have a solution for this? Has somebody come across this before? We're sort of the connective tissue around that. So I actually spend a fair bit of my line thinking deeply about legal problems and whether we should, kind of take a position as a firm on, kind of this form or this language or how we negotiate this or what our kind of policy is on these other things. So I in no way do I feel like I've kind of left being a lawyer.
Yeah.
I don't advise clients on a daily basis on kind of, or do their deals. But I still feel very much, kind of connected to that world. The thing that I picked up, I mean, I was an English and business major, and then I went to law school. I had no actual technical background. So all of the things that I picked up around building technology, building product, helps me be, I hope, an effective translator. Lawyers have desires and, needs and, want things done. And in many cases kind of think like, well, that can't be too hard.
Right.
And then there's the like, oh, we need to actually go do this thing. And it actually is quite hard. And like, I feel like I've built up enough credibility to be able to mediate that conversation in a productive way, in a way that's, hey, we're trying to get to yes, find an answer here, find a solution. It may not be your platonic ideal of what that solution, could be, because we don't have kind of unlimited resources. But I still feel very much, kind of a foot firmly planted in both of these worlds.
I've got one question for you that I thought of on legal tech. I mean, you say you're an advisor to the Legal Tech Fund. You mentioned looking at or evaluating Harvey, which, right now is raising sort of more money than anyone else. I think also, I have not seen the product. I don't know anybody at Harvey, but as a part of that process, also generating maybe sort of like the most promise, but also the most skepticism of anybody in the legal tech industry. I'm not putting this question to you just as like a talk about Harvey and what you think there, but more, a broader sense of, is there the right amount of focus and investment in legal tech? Is there not enough? Are the bets too concentrated? What's your thought on investment in the legal tech landscape right now?
It's a great question, and one that I've had a lot of exposure to, much more so than in a kind of pre-ChatGPT world. where, we represent, many, if not most of the kind of marquee, venture capital investors, out there and growth equity investors out there in the world. And I've spoken to many of them, not giving them legal advice,
Right.
but in my capacity as, someone who, kind of has a view of this industry, and where it's headed, and, kind of how technology plays a role in that and how we're deploying technology today. And so I've spoken to many of our VC funds about it. And I think that Zach and the legal tech, Zach Posner and the legal tech fund were, kind of very early to this game of seeing that, legal was this interesting area. And he has a very broad conception of what legal tech is, right? I mean, it leads into, fintech and reg tech and, a whole bunch of, different areas that all really do have, very strong kind of legal components, to them. I think that it's a very exciting time to be building technology in legal, because so many VCs are wanting to get smart on the industry and understand, kind of the dynamics at play. And yes, AI has kind of brought a lot of them, to the industry, kind of the promise of this kind of transformative change. But I think that's going to bleed into, a whole bunch of, every software product is going to be an AI company to some degree, right?
Sure.
Like there is nobody building software that didn't pause their roadmap to see where the technology can or should be integrated into their product. And if they did, they're probably not long for this world. So, or if they didn't do that. I think that, once the money comes and kind of develops a thesis, an investment thesis around the industry, all of a sudden, there's just going to be a lot more capital and a lot more investment in the industry. And I think that's going to, breed successes. And I think that's super, super exciting. I also think another trend that I've noticed, in talking to a lot of entrepreneurs in the space, I spent a lot of time talking to the startup founders as well, is that a lot of people with real deep tech backgrounds, I'm talking, they were developing autonomous driving companies or very, kind of big data, kind of companies, Palantir, right? People from Palantir moving into the legal tech space. That was not a trend, right? It was, legal tech was in many ways dominated by people who kind of had a legal background, saw a problem, wanted to scratch their itch, built a product, and, great companies have come out of that. And that's often a source of great ideas, is people who have been in the trenches. And that's what I do.
Yeah.
But I think that the interest of people with real, really strong, technical capabilities, is a very positive sign for where the industry is headed from a technical perspective.
Maybe a last sort of substantive question for you. Look, we've talked about this for the better part of 40 minutes, but if you had a sort of crystal ball, or you were thinking about, hey, 5 years down the road, this is how I see the law firm business model evolving, or the market for legal services, maybe let's say more broadly evolving, where do you think we'll be?
It's hard, the putting a time on it is the hardest part of all of this, in many ways, because, it could be much sooner than that. And also people have been, like I said, saying that the billable hour was dead for many, many years.
Yeah.
And so, I think that the model through which firms deliver services, is not just changing because of AI. It's because everybody who's alive today buys goods and services from companies that have a very kind of, customer-centric philosophy and a modern experience. I go to the Apple store, they make it very easy for me to spend money. Very, very easy, right? And we all have that experience. And then we have experiences with businesses that are not like that. And none of us like it, right? And so as we move on here, that's only going to grow. And the capabilities that law firms now have at their disposal to be able to deliver more modern feeling services and hopefully reframe in clients' minds what is the value proposition of what law firms do, beyond having what appear to be relatively junior people spending countless hours doing things that people think are very low value necessary evils. I think that's the transition that firms are going to go through. I think the firms that navigate it successfully could come out of this even better, even more profitable, even stronger, and with much higher client satisfaction and stickiness. But I think it's going to be a windy road And I think it's certainly going to be very interesting to see, how market participants react and how nimble law firm partnerships can be to react to these kinds of, market developments that are coming on, I think, pretty quick.
Super interesting to think about. I mean, it's client services, right?
Yeah.
But you almost think of a client, like the expectations of a client are different than the expectations of a consumer, at least in sort of modern parlance, around like what delivery looks like and what satisfaction should be. And that's interesting. I've got just a couple of sort of fun questions for you that I like to ask folks as we wrap up. The first is if there's a good book that you've read recently or that has been really important in your career development that you'd like to recommend to our audience, and it does not have to be about AI. Although
good. I actually have not been reading books on AI. Enough of my day that I don't need to devote more time to it. So I actually just finished writing another book chapter. About kind of big law business strategy and management, where I read thousands of pages and multiple books, kind of on that topic. And one of my favorites from that is from a professor named Laura Empson in the UK. She wrote a book called Leading Professionals, Power, Politics, and Prima Donnas. It's quite excellent. It's given me a lot of food for thought. And I highly recommend that one to anybody who's kind of in the law firm world and wanting a better understanding of kind of what makes law firms tick and why they work the way that they do, and some of the benefits of that partnership model. The book I'm reading right now, because apparently I should be reading a novel or something, something to take my mind off this stuff, but I can't seem to help it. I'm reading a book called Priceless by William Poundstone, which is about the psychology of pricing. Deals a lot with behavioral economics, which was sort of the thing that I was applying for PhD programs in neuroscience. It's been a real interest of mine for a long time, and it's really fascinating.
If folks want to find your book chapter, where do they look for that?
Sure. It's on SSRN, the Social Science Research Network. There's a draft up there. It hasn't been published yet, but it's going to be in an Oxford handbook on law and management. That's going to be coming out hopefully later this year. Academic publishing timelines are variable, but the draft is up on ssrn.com.
Cool.
And
we'll find that for the show notes.
Awesome.
All right. As we start to wrap up, I've got one final question for you that I like to ask all of our guests, which is, if you could look back on your days, young days as a lawyer, maybe at Simson Thacher, maybe even at Gunderson for the first time, you're just getting started, something that you know now that you wish that you'd known back then.
One of the things that has really guided me on what someone once called my eclectic career path, I decided to take that as a compliment, backhanded though it might have been. Who knows? One of the things that's really guided me is something that I actually learned a long time ago when I was, I think maybe in high school. I was reading biographies of people who, seem to have really, kind of done amazing things, found really interesting jobs, the type of people, or magazine articles, people who have this job where they're like, I wake up every day and I'm happy to go to work. I have to admit, that was not my experience of being a practicing lawyer.
Yeah.
I did not wake up every day thrilled to go to work. In part, that's what drives me to try to make it a better experience for all of my friends who are still doing it. I realized that people who ended up in jobs that they really loved, almost to a person, had no idea that existed when they were going through school, had no conception of how to get there. There was no linear path to that. And I followed a pretty traditional. I went to college. I went to law school. I went to Simson Thacher. I lateraled to another law firm. Right, keeping an open mind to trying different things out, different possibilities, even when it seems scary, even when it feels like, hey, you're going off of this linear path. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes, the linear path does not lead to places that people are thrilled that they ended up. That's something that really stuck with me, and has made me more willing than I think I might have otherwise been to, put myself out there, put things out into the universe and see what kind of comes back. And that's usually my advice for young lawyers is to, be open to exploring different things. It's hard to carve out the time, especially when you're practicing law, to, kind of pursue other kinds of interests. But, if you're not happy doing what you're doing, try to find low risk ways of experimenting with things that you think you might be more stimulated by. Because the best thing about my job is that I wake up every day truly feeling like I'm going to do something that's stimulating and that I'm going to find interesting and hard. I like solving hard problems. And we've got plenty of those. So keeps me busy.
And if there's a theme to the podcast, that is it. So you may see yourself in an advertisement for season 4 of The Abstract sometime soon.
Awesome.
Joe, thank you so much for joining me for this episode. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks a lot, Tyler.
And to all of our listeners, thanks so much for tuning in, and we hope to see you next time.